Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Welcome to this Ishiguro for dummies, or as I like to call it, a dumb bitch's guide to Ishiguro. Now this video was honestly months in the making, and there's no good reason for why it took me so long to finally film this, other than that I was just too much in my head. Because for the longest time I wanted to do tons of research to be able to say something smart and meaningful and very profound about Ishiguro's work here and teach you something basically. But then I thought, you know what, I don't want to be so pretentious, or I don't want to fake anything basically, because there are already tons of videos about Ishiguro's work out there for sure, and a lot of them, like if you're looking for content about his work that is very profound and analytical and maybe a bit scientific, you will find it out there, but it's not going to be this video, because here I just want to give you like my very like surface level, I suppose, just like thoughts on the books I have read of his, how I perceive them, how I like them, because sometimes you listen to like these really erudite words someone has to say about, for example, like certain works, certain book, and you're like fascinated, like, oh my god, not only does this book apparently contain wisdom like no other, also this YouTuber must be insanely smart. But then sometimes still at the end of the video you still find yourself wondering, okay, but was it any fun to read? Like, will I just like simply enjoy it? Come on, you know what I'm saying. So this is more gonna be a guide as to that. Did I enjoy, just like as I said, on a surface level, did I enjoy these books? Did I have a good time reading them? What did I like about them? What did I maybe not like about them? That's just going to be this video. So I have read over the last months, for the one book is actually already the first year anniversary of me reading it, I have read 5 of Ishiguro's novels. Now, if I'm not mistaken, he has written up until today 9 works. I have read 5 of those, so that is over 50%. So I think I can give you a pretty comprehensive, if you want to, overview over like some of his work and how I judge his writing style and stuff like that. Now, I have read Klara and the Sun, his most recent release, An Artist of the Floating World, Never Let Me Go, The Remains of the Day, and When We Were Orphans. Now, these novels I want to divide into 2 sections basically. I don't know if this is also applicable for the other works of Ishiguro that I have not read, but with these I think you can basically divide them into 2 categories. One of them is kind of like dystopian science fiction-y, as in like the world these stories take place in is a bit dystopian science fiction-y. There are like elements as to that, and often maybe the story is also revolving around, like either the story is also revolving around the fact that it is taking place in a dystopian-ish setting, or it's like still part of the story as it is the background to what is happening. And the other works I would put under the big umbrella term reminiscence. So let's talk about the science fiction-y novels first, because I believe if maybe you're watching this video because you are curious about Ishiguro's work and you want to start reading him but you don't really know where, I think, like personally, my opinion, starting with one of these science fiction-y works would be a better place to start, because they're maybe more engaging and more fun, so to say, because more is happening in them plot-wise. But again, of course, it depends on your personal preference. If you like really calm books that are about remembering the past, obviously start with one of the others, but this is like my personal recommendation to you, to start off with one of these 2 books. So in this science fiction-y category, I put Klara and the Sun and Never Let Me Go. Now, I will try to be like spoiler-free in this video. If I catch myself maybe saying something that I shouldn't, I'm gonna put up a warning somewhere on the screen so you know when to mute me basically. But okay, let's talk about Never Let Me Go first, because this was written before Klara and the Sun. Now actually I was really shocked when I heard in the video, I think it was by Nana Florence, she read this and was really like surprised by the twist, because I thought everybody already knew like the big twist basically, or like what this book is about, because this was like the only book of his that I had, as I said, already heard about before reading it. I already knew the big topic, the big twist, if you wanted, because we had talked about this in school when we were talking about dystopian fiction basically. So should I spoil this or not? I don't know if this is a spoiler because I thought this was such a given that people know what this book is about, and I had no idea that you could read this without knowing what it is about, kind of, and then being like, oh wait, that's what this is about? So, oh, okay, this is gonna be harder than I thought. Spoiler, non-spoiler. Okay, so this, but I'm gonna try, at least for the most part. Okay, so this takes place during the 1990s. Out of all the books I read by Ishiguro, this was the easiest to read, as it read the most like a normal novel. This sounds so stupid, but this is Ishiguro for dummies, so I suppose I'm in a good company here. But if you have read this book and some of his other works, especially the ones out of the reminiscing category, you know what I'm saying, that this felt the most normal book. This could have been written by someone else. This felt very easy. This is also the most, I mean, besides this book that takes place, I think, in a not further described and not further named future, this is the most recent book setting-wise, as it takes place in the 1990s. The other books that we'll be talking about later in the reminiscing part of the video, they take place like further back. So this being closer to our everyday, just like presence or everyday life, what we know of our world, this already helped feeling more connected to the story. This is now me trying to not give any spoilers. Tells the story of 3 students. My gosh, I'm gonna have to look at their names again. Kathy, Tommy, and another girl. My gosh. Ruth, thank you. As they grow up in a very sheltered environment in a school, in Hailsham School in the countryside of England, that they have never left in their life. This is like a big compound, and all the students growing up there, they have never seen the outside world, and that is part of the entire concept. Basically, once they graduate from the school, they move to these so-called cottages. There they live in the outside world. They are free to venture, to go anywhere they like, but they still mainly stay in the realm of the cottages, only do like day trips here and there, and then they enter the life of being carers. That is already in the first chapter, so that is not a spoiler per se. So this book is told retrospectively by Kathy, who is in the present day, so to say, already working as a carer, but we know that she will soon stop being a carer. This is like her last year of working as a carer. And she's reminiscing about how she grew up at Hailsham School and then at the cottages with her 2 best friends, the people she was most closest to, and how they experienced and navigated life in their very special situation. And now I am going to give you spoilers, so if you don't want to hear them, I'm maybe going to put up one of these little warning triangles so you know I'm going to be talking spoilers, so you can mute me until this sign disappears. Now the big twist, so to say, or like I went into this book already knowing about this because I thought just everybody knew what this book was about, is that Kathy, Tommy and Ruth, just like all the other children growing up at Hailsham School, they are clones raised for the purpose of organ donating. Let that sink in for a second. They have been cloned from actual life people and have been raised only so they would first work as carers, and carers take care of fellow clones that are already in the later stage of being donors. Now, growing up, the kids at Hailsham School, they know kind of like about this process of donating, of first caring about other donors and then donating themselves. They do know what they are. They do know that they're clones and what they're there for, to donate organs to other people, being harvested in that sense, and then dying pretty early because all their organs are being harvested from their bodies. They do know that, but especially while they're still staying at Hailsham School, where they're like still under the age of like 15, it is not really talked about a whole lot. Then once they enter the cottage phase of their life, once they're already a bit more grown up, there starts to be more awareness on that topic and also more talk amongst them about it. There's also an entire situation of finding your, what's it called, positive? Ah gosh, it's already been a few weeks since I read it and now I forgot the term, but basically I think it was positive. They call the person you have been cloned from your positive or something like that. We follow an entire afternoon where they think they have found the positive of, I think it was Ruth, and they follow this person around out of this innate curiosity, of course, who they have been cloned from, what their life basically could look like if they also had the chance to live a full life, to live until they were older, such as this person already is, and all of that. I don't know. And then, of course, in the later stage of the book, as Kathy is working as a carer herself, she starts being the carer for her two best friends, because they have already entered this donor phase, and she's accompanying them through that. And then at the end of the book, basically, she and Tommy, they seek answers for their entire life situation, to how and why they grew up in Hailsham, what kind of program that really is, who they are cloned from, what their purpose is. And also there's this myth amongst the students that if you find your one person, if you are in a really meaningful relationship, you can delay this process of having to become a donor. You're basically granted a few more years of living peacefully and happily before you have to start giving away your organs, basically. That is a myth amongst the students. And she and Tommy, as he's already a donor himself, they do fall in love, they start a relationship, and they basically seek out the former principal of Hailsham School to actually ask her to be granted this delay before Tommy has to give yet another donation that might be his last, or before Kathy has to give her first one. And that is when they learn all the ins and outs, all the secrets basically of Hailsham School, of them being these clones. There's another very big theme, actually the biggest theme, why I'm only talking about this now, is art, the creation of art at Hailsham School. Basically the only subject they are being instructed in is creating art, whether that is painting or drawing or making something creative of any capacity. And that's being given like a very big place in their life, as that is all they do basically. And that's also like some questions they are seeking answers to at the end of the book, like why were they always driven to create this art? What did it mean? Where was it taken? Because like the best of the best pieces every few weeks were being taken away by someone to presumably be shown somewhere to other people, and they never really knew the entire process behind that. Now this is maybe also already a spoiler again, so I'm going to put up the triangle again. But basically the thought behind that, this principal then explained to them, is that being able to create art was supposed to prove that these clones have souls, that they should not be used for organ harvesting, because they were basically fighting for rights for clones, that they don't have to leave this life anymore. But in the end, this entire project, it was futile, it was for nothing, because they didn't find enough traction, or like some scandal popped up, and so everything was for nothing actually in the end. And the book actually ends with Kathy becoming a donor herself, like Tommy dying, and then Kathy, out of the last of the three that is still living, is preparing for giving her first donation herself. So wow, what a concept. Of course, this book talks a lot about like ethical issues and questions, about very philosophical topics. What is like a human being? What is the soul? Can you prove you have a soul by creating art? Is it okay that these clones are being created and raised only for the purpose of then harvesting their organs and all of that? Crazy concept, right? Very interesting, very intriguing. And here's the thing, in the end, all of these questions you build up throughout the book, they are being answered in this long, big scene at the end where they talk to their former principal. But in a lot of these other books, including the other book I want to talk about in this category, we are not given answers to some of these questions, which is why I suggest to you to start off with this book, because it is in that sense the most satisfying to read, because you actually do get answers for all the questions you develop while reading this book. Okay, but shoot, let's carry on. Let me talk about the other book in this sci-fi section. So Klara and the Sun takes place in at least what feels like a future, but somewhat of a near future. It's not too different, but it is kind of different, especially in the sense that in this world, AFs, artificial friends, are a thing that are kind of like artificial intelligences that are supposed to be companions for children. Kind of like an artificial nanny, playmate, friend for children. One of them is Klara. She, at the beginning of the book, is being adopted or bought by a family, and she becomes the AF to Josie. Now, these AFs are solar powered, which is why this is also called Klara and the Sun, because the, again, quite philosophical topics and questions that this book raises is basically, can artificial intelligences such as Klara, can they have religious feelings? Because she looks upon the sun as this entity, as this godlike thing, basically, because it's the one thing that is giving her all her purpose and her nourishment. It's the only thing that keeps her going. So she has this very religious-like relationship to the sun. So that's already one of the topics, one of the big questions that the book raises. And then another one is that we learn that Josie, the kid that Klara is supposed to be taking care of and like just be company for, is actually pretty sick, maybe fatally so. So what Josie's parents are asking Klara to do basically is to copy Josie's, well, mannerisms, her style of talking and walking, etc., because they are preparing themselves basically for the option that Josie will die, and that they would want Klara to be like Klara's, let's say, mind or like inner being transferred to an AF that looks identical to Josie. So Klara would, they always call it, continue Josie after Josie maybe dies. So that's like another very philosophical question, of course, that we are talking about in that sense, is could an AF, an artificial intelligence or friend, could they replace a human being? Are we just a sum of our, as is like, mannerisms, our speech patterns, the things that we like and don't like? They could all be like copied per se by like a machine, if you want. Or is there more to us, our heart and soul, whatever it would be, that a machine and artificial intelligence could never replicate? That is another really philosophical topic this book talks about, and I really enjoyed. I do have an entire video about Klara and the Sun, where I talk about some thoughts and theories I had right after I read this, which was a year ago already. If you want to watch that video, you're welcome to do so. Don't get freaked out though, because you cannot see my entire face in that video, because this was one of the first videos I ever shot, and back then I was not yet comfortable with showing my face on the internet, so I only showed my face like up until here basically. Like, you could only see my mouth, so you could see where my sound was coming from, like my voice. You can't see my entire face. So, but if you can look over that, just like listen to the thoughts and theories I have about Klara and the Sun, and check out this other video if you want to. Okay, and now let's talk about the reminiscing books out of the ones that I have read so far. Let's maybe start with the most well-known, The Remains of the Day, because it was also turned into a movie starring Anthony Hopkins and Emma Thompson. Now, The Remains of the Day is about a butler in the late 1950s, 1960s, something around that time, and he's reminiscing about the heyday of his life at Darlington Hall. Now, he still worked at Darlington Hall, but a couple of years ago, before the Second World War, it was this really grand, big old mansion, very prestigious. His former master, Mr. Darlington, was a very prominent and influential figure. He being his butler, he witnessed a lot of very important moments in like English history, and there were like a lot of really important people coming over as guests all the time, and he really relished that situation and his role in all those situations, because his entire life revolves around his occupation, him being a butler. He has no life just like for himself. He is 100% with every single piece of his being. He is a butler for Mr. Darlington in those older days. And in the present day, in the late 1950s, a new owner has taken over Darlington Hall, an American, and he's getting to know him a bit better. And then he's going on like the first vacation he has ever gone through either ever or like the first one in a really long time. And he's taking the time to go on this little road trip through England because he's on the way to visit a former employee who worked with him back in the day when Darlington Hall was still like this big institution, so to say. And he's reminiscing about things he got to experience back in the day while Darlington Hall and everyone in it and around it was still really on top of the world. The big catch basically is that we learn that the reason why Darlington Hall is not the same thing it used to be anymore is because its former owner, Mr. Darlington, apparently associated a bit too closely with the Nazi movement during or like right before the Second World War, which is why then during and after the Second World War, he fell out of grace with everybody, understandably, you know? And this is a bit about the butler. Does he have a name, actually? Stevens? Is that his name? Yeah, Mr. Stevens struggled coping with that, or like accepting that part of the history, and maybe how he was also implicated in certain things because he was so devoted to this man who then fell out of grace with everybody because he was just a bit too close to the Nazi party and all of that. And there's also this one instance where he denies having ever worked for Mr. Darlington, even though that was his entire persona, his entire life, because he apparently is ashamed of it maybe, or he does not want to get associated with that part of the past. I don't know. It is about that surface level. It is a very calm read, of course, as I mean, we just follow this man driving through the English countryside and then thinking about some things that happened back then at Darlington Hall. With these books, you will find I will struggle more talking about what it's actually about because there's not a lot maybe happening per se, but it's more about this feeling, I suppose, of nostalgia and maybe also about bad consciences. In this book, it's about like, okay, his former employer who he was so devoted to, who had these Nazi tendencies. How do you cope with that? How does he cope with the essence of his life? Working as a butler at Darlington Hall is not what it used to be anymore, and all of that. Before I ramble on too long, because I'm not sure what I should say about this, let's continue to the next book, because these books have similar vibes in the sense that, for example, An Artist of the Floating World, this takes place in Japan, also after the Second World War, and this too is about the main protagonist, an old man who used to be an artist, grappling with memories of the time before the war and his involvement in the war. He was not a soldier himself, but as an artist, he apparently co-developed and really supported the Japanese imperial cause, which caused so much suffering, and after the war was of course not a popular position or a mindset anymore. So him having led quite a central role, not in the sense that he was a political figure or anything like that, but because he was very well known for being very proactive in this whole sense of Japanese imperialism. And he designed all these propaganda posters and was a leading figure in that sense. He is obviously struggling to deal with his conscience about that, because on several occasions he seemingly very openly talks about it and his role, and it's all like, yeah, I'm not trying to deny that wasn't good, and blah blah blah. Like he's openly, so to say, talking about it. But then there are insinuations in other scenes where we know, okay, there must be a few layers deeper still under that, because what this book is about is that he has two daughters. One of them is already getting married, and another one is right now in the process of finding a partner and getting married pretty soon, because she's already 26, good God. And apparently a couple of months ago, an engagement has already fallen through, and it is insinuated that that was the case because of the father's past and his involvement in propaganda and Japanese imperialism and all of that. So this time around, there's like a new suitor has entered the scene. His youngest daughter once more has a chance to get married, and the elder sister is coaching the dad basically what to say, what not to say, not to refer to certain things. And we have like a couple of very awkward situations where he still like starts to talk about what he did back then, and it gets all like, oh, this is tricky territory. But then we have a scene at the very end, or like towards the end of the book, where basically he talks to his elder daughter and was like, haven't I done like a good job? I did what she told me to do, or I did not say certain things because I didn't want to mess up things for my younger daughter again. And she's all like, what are you talking about? We never had that conversation. I never told you to like not say certain things or like to hide your past or something like that. So right then at the end of the book, we of course think, okay, so was that basically all along like his bad conscience? Like he has these internal struggles within him about accepting his past, not accepting it, and it was never like an external influence being like, you shouldn't say this, or you have to hide this fact, or you have to show remorse about this. But it was not ever actually one of his daughters actually saying these things to him, but it was always himself. So yeah, that's what this book is about, like him grappling with his very controversial, I don't know, position that he played in the past in this pre and during war situation, and how afterwards he has to find peace with it. He has to cope with his responsibility of certain things and all of that. And now last but not least, When We Were Orphans. This starts off very pleasantly, actually. It actually gave me Portrait of Dorian Gray vibes, because this starts off with our young protagonist, Christopher Banks, living in London, living a pretty illustrious life. He is in a very good circle. He's like this famous detective. People are celebrating him. It's about him going to like different gatherings and parties and events, and people, well, yeah, are celebrating him all over the place because he's this famous detective now. But of course there's a backstory, obviously. Because he is an orphan, and he has grown up in Shanghai actually, but then his parents disappeared and he was sent to England to grow up there with his aunt. And now Christopher Banks, already being an established detective, he decides to go back to Shanghai and simultaneously work on this case of his parents, but he's also asked to work on like these bigger issues because war is once more approaching, and he's supposed, and like that's the part I didn't really get in this book, because this case was always talked about in the sense that if he can figure out what really happened to his parents back then, and if they're still alive, what happened, blah blah blah, where are they, he could also kind of like stop the war from happening. But obviously that correlation doesn't make any sense. But it was always talked about, like other people also always talked about, like you have to do this, you have to solve this case, like to help everyone. And that always left me a bit confused, like how would that help anyone? Like that's not gonna stop a war from happening or not happening if he finds out what happened to his parents back then. That was like a part maybe of the story that I did not fully grasp or understand the implications of. But yeah, so from the halfway point, or like maybe even before, we are in Shanghai and we learn both about his life back then when he grew up there, and we follow him trying to solve this case of his disappearing parents. And then the war does break out, and so even though the case, or his solving or not solving of this case, does not actually have any effect of whether there is going to be a war or is a war, because the war is breaking out either way. Of course him losing his parents, especially in such mysterious circumstances, he doesn't know, are they dead, are they not dead, what happened to them, is of course a deep-seated trauma with him that he just for himself needs to solve, even though like decades have already passed. It was like always the thing he wanted to do, to return to Shanghai to figure out what happened. And he actually does find out what happened, though I don't believe that, once again, not all the answers you might develop reading this book are actually answered, but we do at least find out what happened to his mother, definitely, and to his father as well. So yeah, I have talked for so long, I'm not quite sure what I should say more about this book. I definitely had an easier time grabbing the essence of the like sci-fi, philosophical, ethical questions books than the historical reminiscing books. But that's also just like my personal preference, because I always prefer plot-based over character-based books. And I think in comparison, though I mean, are these necessarily plot-based? No, I mean, these just talk about these philosophical issues, and I found that easier to think about as well, instead of these historical events that took place and people trying to grapple with their past and come to terms with it. I mean, that's of course at the end of the day, a personal preference, what you prefer more. I hope this video was some guide of some kind for someone out there. I really don't know if this was useful in any way, shape or form, but these are the 5 Ishiguro books I have read. I definitely had a good time with them. I definitely like these 2 books best, but I'm also really happy I read those. I will definitely also be reading some, if not all, of his other work, because I have really grown to like and appreciate his writing style, even if I find it a bit difficult maybe sometimes, because it's maybe not what I usually gravitate towards, but it's always a good thing to step outside of your comfort zone and experience new things. So once again, this was Ishiguro for Dummies, a dumb bitch's guide to Ishiguro. I hope it helped you out. Thank you for watching, and I'm gonna see you in the next video. Bye!